Subscriptions are pretty much the most common means of making money nowadays. Like, everything is a subscription. And if you're business savvy, it is so relieving to have guaranteed revenue every month. I mean, think about it. Your phone bill, my Patreon, and Netflix. I'm sure there were subscription models before Netflix started booming in popularity, but I think Netflix made it normal. Netflix changed everything if you really think about it. And they were ahead of the curve by a mile and a half. And heck, they're still the #1 streaming app with like 225 million payments a month. To put a peg in that conversation, it's irrefutable that the reason why Netflix took off the way it did was because it was a novel idea. You know, watching what you want, when you want, with no ads. And it's such a night and day difference between that and conventional cable. Why would you want to watch cable when you have a streaming app? And it doesn't help that there was zero competition for Netflix in the early days, allowing it to pretty much have a monopoly. And I don't know the exact term, but the term Netflix became generic to describe watching stuff. Same way Google became a generic term. Is that relevant? Not really, no. But it shows how dominant Netflix was in the early days. Emphasis on early. Today, Netflix has got competition, which is ultimately a good thing. Because that's the entire point of capitalism. You know, to have competition, to create a better product for us. Monopolies are bad. What a hot take. It's weird though, because despite what I said earlier on, Netflix wasn't really a monopoly. It was Netflix versus cable, and Netflix was the underdog. Netflix had to make so many banger shows to entice people to join. BoJack, Sex Education, House of Cards, 13 Reasons Why, Stranger Things. You know, despite me not liking every one of the popular Netflix originals, I respect what they've done and the impact it's had on the entertainment industry. I briefly touched on it in the Family Guy video, but streaming ushered in a new era of longer, story-driven shows, and I low-key adore that revolution. But there are caveats to it. Netflix is the epitome of 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and you might not comprehend why yet, but I can guarantee you will understand by the end of today. Exhibit A, binging. Binging is an idea that a person can sit down and watch a season of a show in one sitting, and it's incredibly intriguing because you can just turn your brain off for a while and indulge. Cable didn't really have that. You'd only be able to binge if you bought a DVD for your show or whatever, or if you recorded it on TV. So Netflix just listing an entire show on demand was a really big deal. And back then, everyone adored it. And with shows like Friends, you can just put it on and forget about life. And with a story-driven show, you don't have to wait for the next episode. You can just continue watching. It's convenient. That's the entire appeal. It's a minor thing, but Cartoon Network would do a thing called a Steven Bomb for a show called Steven Universe, which was basically 5 episodes back to back in a week, usually having one overarching story. This format made the show boom for a week, and then after that it had a several month hiatus. Netflix is similar to that, but it does it in a worse way in my opinion. Basically, Netflix would be like, you've got a show, the entire show is coming out on this date, and then it would just be several hours of content in one go. Which is really awesome if you like binge culture, but there are a lot of issues with it. Okay, basically if you're an adult with a schedule, it's hard to be able to fit in the time to binge watch an entire show. People have jobs, and you split up the fan base of the show into 2 camps, those who are caught up with it and those who aren't. Which is really problematic because those who aren't caught up maybe can't get caught up because of external reasons, and you have a mountain of content to climb that like only people with a lot of free time can afford to spend watching a show. And then those that have watched the show spoil it for everyone else, making it a case of, now you can give all your free time to Netflix to get caught up, to have context, or don't go on social media because you'll be spoiled. The only reason I watched Squid Game was because I kept seeing TikTok memes about it and I wanted context, which is really smart if you're Netflix. You can return to investors and be like, well, we kept people watching for 8 hours a day. However, on the other end of that spectrum, the hype generated whenever a new show comes out is temporary. Duh. And the spike of a new show getting dropped all at once is unrivaled, but it ends quickly. Okay, so we're gonna do a little comparison. Is it a fair comparison? We'll talk about that later. But Disney Plus came out in 2020 during the initial wave of and it blew up. It's still behind Netflix, but it's still gargantuan. Disney Plus has a different means of dropping content. Weekly. Weekly is a different approach from Steven Bomb and the Netflix approach, and it might be my favorite. And it's ironic because it resembles cable, but in a modern way. Okay, this may not be exactly accurate, but I found that Google Trends gives a general estimate as to how popular something is. And examining the Google Trends chart for Squid Game, it was peaked in October 2021, and then it fell off after that. Okay, let's compare it to a Disney Plus show called Moon Knight. It's very interesting to see the effect the weekly format has, and heck, for devil's advocate, I'll show you the graph for the release of Steven Universe. I find it evident that the release schedule for Moon Knight was way healthier, And it wasn't rocket science either. The Netflix method of dropping an entire season at one time is unhealthy because it stifles fandom participation and alienates those who aren't 100% caught up. The Disney Plus method of dropping is far healthier because as each episode comes out, the fandom can talk and speculate, and everyone has a week to get caught up. And even better, the Disney release schedule makes hiatuses less daunting, as the release of shows are staggered to not dump everything at one time. You're telling me I had to wait nearly 3 years for season 4 of Stranger Things to come out? If the release was staggered to be weekly or monthly, the waiting times would have decreased. Maybe not by that much, but it would have been less abhorrent to wait for. And I know it's a minor thing, but Netflix should have a comment section. If you're expecting me to go on Twitter after finishing the season, don't. Everyone will probably be talking about the finale. What if I'm on an earlier episode and I'm so hyped by it and I want to talk about it and speculate about it? The fandom participation is so important for a show, you have no idea. And it's not like Disney is the only one dropping weekly. HBO Max does a variety of release formats, ranging from weekly to whatever else. And in the case of Infinity Train, which you might not know about, but you don't need to know about it to talk about it, that show released weekly, which helped it out so much. The speculation element of that show was amplified because it was weekly, and it had everyone anticipating what was going to happen next. And I can't express how much the lack of that damages Netflix in the long run. And Netflix is beginning to feel the burden of that release schedule. How do they handle it? Exhibit B, too many shows! Whenever you dump an entire season of a show at one time, you will have a drought in between seasons. Duh. How do you remedy that without changing the release format? You make it more. If you don't know how Netflix functions, Netflix has original programming which is made in-house, and then Netflix buys the license to show other shows and movies. Netflix originals are a better option financially because they are produced in-house and they aren't subject to licensing. Netflix be like, yeah, we're gonna make 129 Netflix originals. And they did! They made 129 Netflix originals in 2021. That's over 2 a week, on average. What? How many Netflix originals can you name that were released in 2021? I bet you can't name over 3. The reason why you can't name over 3 Netflix originals is because their marketing's terrible. Netflix's marketing is heavily reliant on word of mouth, which is the cheapest and can be really effective. Case in point, Squid Game. However, for 99% of shows, they need to be marketed first of all to have any chance of garnering word of mouth. The way the Netflix algorithm works is peculiar. It operates on what it wants you to watch, and you're met with so much content it's difficult to choose what to watch. It sucks. Also, if you've watched a movie, it would suggest you watch it again. Why? I've watched Whiplash 3 times. Why are you telling me to watch it again? You know, I was really happy about streaming becoming massively popular because it meant you weren't subject to watching your favourite shows at weird times. On conventional cable, the old white men would point at ratings and be like, yeah, we should end that. However, in a lot of those situations, there's a lot more nuance. The shows are played at time slots, and sometimes the most fire shows would air at like, what, 7? The audience that is available to watch the show at 7 is different from the audience that can watch it after school or whatever. But the executives are like, well, look here, it didn't do very well. You know, I thought that problem would have went away, but it just manifested in a different way. Every show is subject to an algorithm. If the algorithm doesn't suggest the content, it sinks to the realm of obscurity, and then randomly on Twitter we hear that the show has been cancelled. Midnight Gospel. The Midnight Gospel was a very unique show, and I'm not going to go on a soapbox and start ranting about it and how it shouldn't have been cancelled, but it could have had a drastically different future if it wasn't shadow dropped and barely talked about. Everything about shadow dropping is super toxic, and it's incredibly unfair for the animators who worked on the show. The frequency of Netflix shows that come out, and then the animated Netflix shows that come out in the same frequency, just undermines animation in my opinion. To my understanding, I could be wrong. I don't think I am, but animation is objectively harder, as there are so many cooks in the kitchen to produce a series, and Netflix's format of distribution is so reliant on frequency that the medium of animation can't really keep up. It's a similar point, but there's a Netflix show called Inside Job, and I watched it recently because it's been on my list for months. But there was such little buzz around the show, I only heard about it because of Alex Hirsch working on it. And come to think of it, that was the exact same thing for the Midnight Gospel. I only heard of that show because of Pendleton Ward. Animation is treated terribly on Netflix. You've got an option to filter it by anime, yet you can't filter it by animation, like, what? Okay, having anime as a filter option is kind of demeaning, and goes to box anime and further. But genuinely, what if I want to watch animation on Netflix, and I just get suggested Rick and Morty over and over again, or God forbid the Boss Baby show? Finding something to watch on Netflix is hell, unless you already know what you want to watch. And that problem is worsened by the animation on Netflix being shafted. Due to the medium of animation being incredibly time consuming, it would have been infinitely healthier to drop the shows in a weekly format, but I guess that does not coincide with the Netflix approach to shoveling any and everything out at once. It's so predatory. You know, I was really hopeful that animation on streaming would have been treated better, but in retrospect I guess not. If you're not giant already, there is no hope your show will go past season 3. The more depressing thing is that amid the stock chaos that happened earlier this year, Netflix announced that it would scale back animation and focus on live action. And then they announced the Squid Game show. Exhibit C, Netflix in panic mode. Okay, Netflix went through a rough patch in 2022 which caused them to reevaluate everything amid stronger competition, and the rising cost of living causing people to leave. Okay, basically since that goofy event in 2020 that caused everyone to stay inside, Netflix boomed in subscribers, which then gave them this false image that they were larger than they actually were. And then between that and an international conflict I can't talk about, it led to Netflix losing 200,000 subscribers. And it came out that in Q2 of 2022 they lost 1 million. Now because of that, Netflix are changing to try and get things back on track. They're making an ad-supported tier for Netflix, they're scaling back animation. Wow, what a good change, except animation has been some of the most lucrative parts of Netflix, and scaling it back only hemorrhages future shows' chances of being successful. I find it maddening that they're scaling back animation, yet aren't scaling back their Netflix originals, which if you thought 129 was bad for 2021, boy. In 2022, they're set to release 398. Yeah, 398. That's at least one every day. How is that logistically healthy? I honestly think that Netflix is out of touch, and they're trying to cling on to the binge culture that was popular 10 years ago, but it just doesn't work like how it used to, and it's not a novelty anymore. If I were ahead of Netflix, what I would do is I'd scale back Netflix originals, keep animation the exact same, and honestly, focus on the marketing and the community aspect of Netflix. A comment section would really help it out, and changing the release schedule to be weekly would mean that they wouldn't have to produce as much content, because they've got content to fill out the schedule. I find the solution to be so comically straightforward, and better for everyone, honestly. Why haven't they already done it? I don't know. What I do know is that they honestly deserve every bit of negative press they've gotten because they've actively harmed the industry by their predatory strategies. And other platforms aren't exactly helping either, but that's a problem for a different video. If you've enjoyed this video, subscribe, it would mean a lot. Thank you to Patreon for making this video possible. I couldn't have done it without them.